All right, it's 2:45. Thank you, everybody, for coming to see our panel today. I'm Sandy Rodesky from CISA. I run the Vulnerability Management subdivision in the cyber division within CISA. I am formerly from the Department of Defense. I spent a long time at DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, and still maintained my connections here to AFCEA, and was asked to put a panel on, and thought it would be a great opportunity to share what we do at CISA for critical infrastructure, state, local, tribal, territorial, and also the federal civilian executive branch. And I brought my team here to go over the different services in our portfolio. We've got Victoria Ontiveros. She is going to be talking today about our SBOM program, our Software Bill of Materials program. We've got Sean Latona here, who's going to give you the day in the life of a vulnerability management operations chief. He's my ops chief. And then I've got Martin Kahiko here. He runs our cyber resilience branch. What they do is they build both maturity-based assessments and also do operational technology assessments and high-value asset assessments. So there are different stakeholders that we support, as I said, and different environments drive different types of pen testing, validated architecture reviews, and he'll go over all of that. I've got Kevin Donovan here. He's the deputy over our vulnerability response and coordination team. And he'll talk about our CVE program, our KEV program, vulnerability disclosure, and all the things we do to kind of keep everybody aware about the vulnerabilities that we're disclosing with our industry partners every day. And then we've got Paul Brandow. Paul Brandow is the chief of Red Team at CISA. And his team does both federal red teams and also Fortune 500 private industry and operational technology red teams. And he'll talk about what they do on the red team. For the first level setting, just want to kick it over to Sean Latona. I'd like him to talk a little bit about what we do in operations. As I said, we've got a very diverse customer base, stakeholder base, and in everything we do in vulnerability management it includes the entire software security lifecycle. So, it could be software security analysis. It could be a 0-day that we're working to disclose. It could be an operational technology environment that we know that an adversary might have access to. And Sean is in the middle of that every day. And what we attempt to do in vulnerability management is contribute back some kind of actionable product service that these stakeholders can implement, or will drive towards security guides or informational analysis that is actionable, so that they, the entire sector or subsector can implement. And we focus specifically on the software security side of the house, specifically the vulnerability. So, Sean, why don't you give us a little bit of your day in the life of what you're battling every day and kind of some common examples, because I really think people don't understand what we do, and we're usually first in line to get some of the information, and how do we do that, and what is the output and the value?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Just to double check, everybody can hear me, right? All right, so the microphones are super sensitive and always on. Okay, note number one. So thank you very much. Like Sandy had mentioned, my name is Sean Latona, and I'm the Chief of Operations for Vulnerability Management. So I really have kind of the coolest job because I don't really necessarily have to do much. These folks do all the magic. I just bring the magic that they do across CISA and across all of our stakeholders. So just to level set again really quick, so CISA's Vulnerability Management Program is not your traditional enterprise vulnerability management team, right? That is kind of a common term throughout the ecosystem. We get that. But we don't run around and try to secure and patch CISA's network. No. We have a suite of services that we try to deliver to our various stakeholders. So like Sandy had mentioned again, our stakeholder set is pretty broad. We go across the federal civilian executive branch, but then also out into the critical infrastructure, SLTT service, all of the stakeholders pretty much across the United States. And we also help our international partners and our interagency partners, including the DoD, from time to time and in very scoped and specific circumstances. So really what I do, like I had mentioned, and what my team does, is we try to stay ahead of an incident, right? That is one thing that is pretty standard, right? Vulnerability management is we are very left of boom, right? We are trying to get out before an incident actually happens. And we'll use, certain tools like the vulnerability disclosure process. We have the KEV, the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, and Kevin will speak to that a little bit. But then also when it comes to what Paul and Martin and what their teams do, we are trying to help our stakeholders really get a good in-depth understanding of the current posture of their networks so that they can make certain risk decisions, hopefully to allow them to drive down that risk and increase their resiliency, right? Across the cybersecurity division, we have other subdivisions. We have our threat hunting subdivision. We have our capacity building subdivision. And we have the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. You all have maybe heard of the JCDC. So I work across CSD and CISA to make sure that whatever is going on within our subdivision is known, right? So if we find some sort of a risk or if we have a vulnerability that we think presents an inordinate amount of risk to either the federal government or critical infrastructure, that those teams are also postured to respond, or that we can amplify the information that we know through capacity building or through the JCDC so that everybody can take the appropriate measures for their particular organization.
So let's walk through one use case. I'm going to go to Kevin really quick on coordinated vulnerability disclosure. Often we get tips from researchers. We work with industry partners, vendors, the gamut of cybersecurity specialists that are seeing and detecting new vulnerabilities, and they may be novel vulnerabilities that aren't fully disclosed yet. And Kevin's team works very closely with Sean as the first thing that we're trying to do once we work with the company. Why don't you talk to him about that process of how we issue a CVE? And then Sean, I want you to follow up with what we do to understand where the vulnerability is at and how bad it is, and the value we give back to the community.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. So our coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, the CVD process, generally begins with us receiving a tip or a vulnerability report from a researcher or a research organization. And that's when my team starts to begin to assess the validity of the report, the severity of the report, and to determine if there's a real vulnerability in that report. At that point, we begin our third-party disclosure process, in which we engage with both the researcher who found the vulnerability and the vendor or the open source project in which the vulnerability resides. We then work together to determine the best way forward to responsibly disclose that vulnerability publicly, both to give the vendor or open source project the time to develop mitigations or a patch, so that when we do go to release the vulnerability, all consumers or customers of that product can really get out there and protect themselves against any future exploitation of that vulnerability. Through our process, we work with hundreds of researchers and thousands of vendors to disclose vulnerabilities, a couple thousand every year in our CVD process.
And from there, when we, let's take a recent example, just throw one out there, Sean. New vulnerabilities disclosed. What do you do at CISA and VM, and how do we get this information out to the entire global ecosystem?
Yeah, so we have a couple of mechanisms that we do that. So obviously when Kevin and his team, they're parsing through thousands of vulnerabilities every year, right? At any given moment, there's hundreds of them that they have in the queue or in the hopper. So what our job is we take that information that they've got, determine what could be the potential impact across the federal government or even critical infrastructure, right? We use a series of tools that allow us to know where this vulnerability may possibly lie. Can we detect it using a CVE? Are we looking for a specific device? Is it a device that is normally exposed to the internet? So we'll take that, we'll work with Kevin's team, we'll work with some members of Paul's team, and we'll try to make an analysis of what does this actually look like should this thing go public and should people actually find out about it. Sometimes we also already have some information from threat hunting or from the JCDC where like, hey, we're noticing there's a lot of chatter around a specific device or category of devices, and we start to marry up this information that we've got. From there, we have a couple of avenues that we'll use, right? Across the federal government, we have some sort of mandatory levers that we can pull. The Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog actually ties back to a binding operational directive that sort of compels agencies to take some action. But if we don't necessarily have that known kind of nexus yet, we will go out with just amplified messaging, right? We'll have data calls. We'll have broader sector calls either with the federal government or with certain sector partners if necessary, and really just try to get the information out there that, hey, this team of experts has looked at a vulnerability. We know that it's out there, it's prevalent, we can see it across the ecosystem. You might want to do something about it, right? And like Kevin had mentioned, they put guidance together, specific guidance. We want to make sure that we have actionable information for organizations to take, other than just simply, hey, patch or look out, right? This thing is coming. So we really do take an in-depth look at a lot of these vulnerabilities and make sure that everybody knows where it may be, what the potential impact could be, and really what it is that we recommend that you do about it.
Can you talk a little bit about the services that we offer, a couple of the core services, one in particular, the cyber hygiene scanning? Just give them a little bit of detail about what that is and what that enables us to do.
So our cyber hygiene program is exactly as Sandy had mentioned, just a series of tools that we use to conduct vulnerability scanning. So we have two types of vulnerability scanning. We have vulnerability scanning, which looks at external network interfaces. And then we also have web application scanning, which does exactly what kind of web application scanners do. So one of the most valuable pieces of that for us and both for our stakeholders is when Kevin does find something, Kevin and his team have something that they're looking at and they're working, it gives us the ability to take a quick snapshot of where this thing may live, right? We have a little bit of more enhanced visibility into those scanning partners, I'm sure you'll understand that, than we would with like open source intelligence, right? Or open source information. So it allows us the ability to pinpoint where it may be across our specific stakeholders. Also, it gives us the ability to go out kind of early with some of this information to those enrollees. Like, hey, we know this is coming. We're working on it. We know you've got it. Please take action kind of right away, right? Again, the federal government has certain obligations. A lot of critical infrastructure doesn't, but we can give them sort of that forewarning that, like, we've got this thing coming and you should take a look at it.
So, in it said differently, is because CISA has an ability and authorities to issue binding operational directives and emergency directives to the federal civilian executive branch, and we partner with DoD. So, like, if we issue a BOD, we coordinate that with DoD and NSA and others, so they know what we're putting out, and it is a directive in nature, whereas state and local and critical infrastructure, they look at our BODs. We know based on our relationships that they are keeping an eye out on the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog and also our binding operational directives, because they're kind of keeping track of what are we saying is important at CISA, and that is a huge contribution back to the rest of the community. We get it all the time from Five Eye partners, industry partners. They're watching what we're putting out, and we really are looked at as the lead. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about vulnerability prioritization and enrichment? Because that is a huge thing that we offer back to the community in a couple of different ways. Everyone kind of tracks like CVSS scoring, but we offer another mechanism to do vulnerability prioritization, and I think it's really important that we talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. So our team, in addition to disclosing and assigning CVEs, reviews, analyzes, and prioritizes every single CVE that is published. And there were over 40,000 of those last year. And in order for us to be able to handle that amount of CVEs and really understand those that pose a threat to the federal civilian executive branch, we use something called SSVC, which is Stakeholder Specific Vulnerability Categorization. That allows us to take a view of a vulnerability of how it's going to impact our specific stakeholders, being the federal executive branch, rather than a sort of vanilla or wide spectrum view of a vulnerability that a CVSS score will give you. The CVSS will give you the general severity of the vulnerability. SSVC will let you know what type of risk that specific vulnerability poses to your network, your organization, or the specific stakeholders that you represent. So by using this categorization, prioritization schema method, we're able to take those 40,000 vulnerabilities and really focus on the ones that pose the most immediate threat to the federal government, based on the type of the vulnerability, and like Sean says, based on the visibility we have into the prevalence of that vulnerability within the federal government. And it then allows my team to let Sean know like how bad the specific vulnerability is and how the federal government should begin to respond to a vulnerability that meets this categorization. What's really nice about SSVC is that it can be tailored to any set of stakeholders, any organization. And sometime, I think it was last year, Sandy, we began to enrich every single vulnerability, every single new CVE with these key decision points, these key attributes for vulnerability that allow others to get a head start in prioritizing that vulnerability. So essentially, we let folks know about the state of exploitation of a vulnerability, what type of technical impact the vulnerability would have on the system, and finally, whether or not the vulnerability is automatable. By taking those into account and understanding the specific stakeholders' situation or asset inventory, teams can really apply the scarce resources they have for vulnerability management and cyber protection to those specific vulnerabilities that are going to pose their organization a threat. So that's really a way of CISA. We need to prioritize every single one of these vulnerabilities for our own protection, for the federal government's protection, but now we're sharing this data for the rest of the community, anybody in the world, to be able to consume this data and get a head start on prioritizing vulnerabilities that pose a threat to their networks. And that can come in really handy when you have a good idea of your asset inventory, especially if you can get those SBOMs from the vendors.
That's so perfect. I was actually going to kick it over to Victoria. So Victoria is going to talk a little bit about SBOM. So we not only are we in the thick of operations, we are looking at supply chain risk management, building capabilities to have more awareness in software security. And, our vision is that the life cycle of vulnerability management capabilities that we deliver integrate together in our mission at CISA in protection of the federal civilian executive branch, but also in it produces value for everyone else in the ecosystem. And so I'd like Victoria to talk a little bit about SBOM, the evolution of SBOM, where it's at maturity-wise, and what we're doing about operationalizing it in our vulnerability management ecosystem today.
Thanks, Kevin and Sandy, for the great segue. In case not everyone here has been subject to one of Alan Friedman's spiels or talks, very quickly, SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. It basically acts as an ingredients list for your software. And so we think that if we are buying software from a software producer, that the software producer should, one, know what's in their software, two, be able to have a list of what's in their software, and three, give us that list so that we know the components of the software that we're buying and using and putting on our networks. And so to illustrate this, for example, I love to bake, and so I started baking sugar cookies once a week into the office, and I have a coworker who doesn't eat eggs. I had no clue, and he had been avoiding my baking for weeks and just been miserable watching everyone else enjoy the cookies. And so finally, I offered him one in person, and then he said, no, he doesn't eat eggs. And I said, oh, I use flaxseed eggs. I'm not buying eggs right now. And he was amazing. But then he realized he had been missing out on all of the baked goods for the last few weeks, but that he could then eat all of my baked goods from here on forward. And so he only knew that because me being the software producer, had told him what was in my software. If I had had an SBOM ingredients list, he would have known that off the bat and not had to wait around for me to tell him. So for vulnerability management, for example, if you have an ingredients list for all of your software, you have a list of the components that are active on your networks. So for example, to go back to the dark days of Log4j, everyone was scrambling to figure out, is Log4j in my software? Do I need to be worried? What do I need to be doing right now? For people who had SBOMs, instead of contacting software producers and hoping that they knew if it was in their software or not, and when they could tell them, if they had an SBOM with them, they could check the SBOM and see if Log4j was included in the SBOM and then know how they needed to react from then on forward. So an SBOM in that sense can reduce the total vulnerability response time. And then to what Sean mentioned about getting left of boom, an SBOM is data, so information, and the goal is to transform that information into intelligence that can then drive your vulnerability decisions, your actions there on forward to better secure your networks. So what that looks like is having a list, knowing what's in each software means that you know what components are commonly used or what components are most used in your network. So that helps you in the vulnerability prioritization. It helps you figure out, okay, do I have any software on my networks that is end of life or approaching end of life? Do I have to start planning for that? When should I start planning for that? And it helps you make these decisions ahead of time so you're not reacting when something has become critical. And we've seen SBOM as a whole become a lot more mature, especially since 2021, when the National Telecommunications and Information Administration published the SBOM minimum elements. So that's 4 years ago now, which is a lifetime for software. And since then, we've seen so many more tools come into the market. And so back then, what the tools were really focused on was generating an SBOM, so just making them come into existence, because you couldn't really be asking for an SBOM if there wasn't a tool available for the software producer to make the SBOM. That is not where we are now. We now have so many SBOM generation tools, both proprietary and open source software. We are seeing tools get into the space of how do you manage all of the SBOMs that you're getting, and then how do you analyze the SBOMs? How do you get that data and transform it into the intelligence that you need? So some of them, what they'll do is flag active CVEs that you need to address within your software based on the SBOMs that you fed into them. And where we want to get to is that everyone has all of the information about their software supply chain that they need to make decisions to better secure their networks.
And can you give some examples? Because we do this thing called SBOM-a-rama at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, and we'll do a virtual event and an in-person event or government focused SBOM-a-rama. And we bring in stakeholders. Sometimes they're in industry, sometimes they're government, and they're implementing. But can you give an example of someone that's really forged ahead? I know Army has made a lot of progress in operationalizing it. What are they doing, and how are they integrating it into their processes? Are there some examples you can share in some certain industries? Because I know that the car industry, automobile industry, and others have made a lot of progress. Just to give them an idea. So the Auto ISAC has been one of the earliest adopters of SBOM, and so I think they have one of the more mature processes for requesting SBOMs, generating SBOMs, analyzing those, and then sharing the insights to where they need to go. But we also have a sort of regular syncs with the Department of Defense, and that has been really helpful to get information sharing from what CISA is doing and what the DoD is doing in terms of operationalizing SBOM and also increasing implementation and adoption. And the Army has been really one of the first movers in this space, in that they now require software producers to provide SBOMs early on, and so then they're slowly building
increasing the illumination visibility that they have into their supply chains, and they're integrating the analysis of that data to drive the decisions that they're making moving forward.
And really what we envision is that, this just becomes another norm. It's awareness for the ecosystem owner. And, for us as defenders, really holistically to have that additional information about, what's in our software, instead of guessing and, being in that Log4j scenario. Okay, I'm going to completely pivot over to assessments now. There's not really a good segue. So in my team, I've got, Paul Brandow, who runs our Red team, and they do both private industry Red teams and also the federal space Red teams. And we also have a capability called Federal Attack Surface Testing, and we do pen tests as well. So I'm going to kind of bucket everything pen testing, red teaming in his area, even though he's really sensitive about me mixing up pen testing and red teaming, as all red teamers do. Paul, can you talk a little bit about our authorities and, what they enable us to do and, some of the opportunities that we've had to really contribute back to both the federal and the federal space and also critical infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a few questions unpacked there, but we'll hope to get to all of it. And on the authorities piece, one of the really cool things that one of the authorities that CISA got back in 2021 in one of the executive orders in the NDA authorities that, interestingly enough, come to CISA as well, allow CISA to offer services to the federal civilian executive branch of government. For those of you that are in the DoD, this is basically everything except for .mil. Think of almost any federal department other than the DoD, generally speaking the IC as well. So your departments of education, transportation, treasury, those types of things, allow us to offer our services, whether it's a pen test or red team, cyber hygiene services, web application scans, any of this free of charge to federal civilian executive branch of government, and to do it with or without consent of some of those agencies. So really, really interesting authorities granted to CISA that we're still working to implement at scale. So that's really cool. The rest of our authorities to do, I guess, what we call offensive services, not the same as offensive services in the DoD, but still offensive in nature, come in the form of a rules of engagement where we would go, engage with a state government or a local government or a private sector company. We've done plenty of assessments with Fortune 100s, Fortune 10s even, to help them understand their risk, whether that's a pen test or a full adversarial emulation, red team style engagement. The authorities apply, and as long as they're willing to work with the government, we're more than likely willing to work with them. We have a little bit of value proposition in there as well, in that at least we can offer our services for now free of charge, which is just wonderful and usually is enough to get organizations to come and speak with the government, where otherwise, they might say, hey, government, we don't want you in our proprietary stuff, or, it's 2025, so we may not trust you or something like that. Really, it's at least a jump off to a deeper conversation around really understanding their cybersecurity risk by doing technical assessments. In most cases, in fact, almost all cases, we come back and get really good glowing reviews on not just the pen test, but definitely the red teams. And from our perspective, we have quite a bit of success and usually leave them with a lot to work on, whether it's on detection engineering or filling gaps in detections that they didn't know they have, especially when it comes to things like linkages between two agencies or two departments, or maybe one private sector company or a state and maybe their local IT provider. If you've been following the news, all of the managed security services that might come in and manage a service, something like that. Well, there's linkages, there's trust between both of those, and so as such, there can be weaknesses. So really a cool time to be part of CISA, a cool bit of authorities to try to implement. And then your last part of your question, Sandy, was about scaling. This has been a really interesting challenge for us. CISA is a relatively new agency, and although there's quite a bit of maturity in SBOM and coordinating operations and vulnerability disclosure, KEV, and all of that, we also have a tremendous amount of constituents or clients that need and want to work with us. Not only is it all of the federal government, it's also all of the U.S. critical infrastructure in state, local, and tribal territorial, which is in our authority, in our scope, provided that they'll work with us. So we always get asked the question, all right, how can we do more? How can we scale? How can we get to the little city in Missouri or the state of Maine, or pick your organization? How do we get to these ones? Well, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of those constituents across our nation, some of which we know about, some of which we don't, some which want to work with the government and some that don't. So we have sort of the concept of scaling services. Our cyber hygiene service can really scale. It's almost 100% automated at this point, as long as a customer can enroll and attest that they own a block of IP addresses. Free cyber hygiene scanning for them right away, as long as they're in our scope. We can do the most of those per year, and then it sort of ramps up. So the technical maturity gets more. The ability to scale gets, it's a decreasing graph there. We would go from there, cyber hygiene, to something like a automated pen test or automated vulnerability scan, up to a more manual pen test. Our services that we call risk and vulnerability assessments, or RVAs. Basically a 2-week-long pen test with full-time operators, 1 week external, 1 week internal. Probably what you'd get from a commercial consultancy, but similar in scope. And then last but certainly not least, at the end of our assessment maturity model is what we call our red team engagements. And that's a service specifically that I run. I like to describe it as our final boss of assessments. If you're a gamer in the audience, or maybe a former gamer, this is the big one. This is 90 to 120 days. We'll tell a couple people that we're coming, but usually those are just trusted agents to keep the assessment safe and to make sure if there's anyone from the FBI here or law enforcement, to make sure that they don't show up at my house or my place of work and say, Paul, why are you hacking this department, this agency? We want to stay above board and frankly off of all of what I imagine is your all radar. We want to stay out of SIGINT as much as we can help it as well. And so we have trusted agents to keep those kinds of things safe, but we really do want to get an honest assessment. We don't want to inspect anyone, but we also don't want, if you've ever been on the receiving end of an inspection, when the inspectors come, you dress up nice, you sit up in your chair, you answer all the questions, and then you hope that they leave as quickly as humanly possible. We don't want you on your best day. We don't want an organization on their best day. We want organizations on any given Tuesday or any given May to see how they do, because bad guys don't care about timing. They don't care if we're getting riffed. They don't care if there's changes in administration. They don't care about budgets. They don't care if your agency's getting shut down. They care about getting to the information that you're trying to protect the most. That's what we try to do as well, and we carry that out when we scope and we do our assessments as well. For our red teams and for most of our offensive engagements, because we do come in with that value proposition of free, we also get to be a little bit more coercive, I guess maybe the word I'll use here, with scope, where we will ask for everything within a federal department or an organization to be in scope. Don't take anything out. Most of the CIOs and CISOs know where the problem areas of their organization is. Any of you all sitting here that work in an organization probably know, oh boy, I just logged into that system. No one emailed me. Probably someone should have emailed me, or someone should have revoked my access. And CISOs and CIOs usually know where that is. So we ask for all of that to be in scope so we can look at all the nooks and crannies, look at all the dusty corners of your network, and really comment on overall risk the same way bad guys would. So that's assessments in a nutshell, I guess.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the collaboration you do? Because this is one thing with pen testing and red teaming that is different, and the contribution that we give back to these companies and federal agencies is really the learning, the lessons learned with the SOCs. And so go over kind of like what you do in collaboration and how it tests the full cycle, like people, process, technology.
Sure, yeah. With the red team specifically, that's really the thing that we harp on the most. It's not just uncovering all the CVEs that may be out there or all of your attack surface. While that's important to understanding what's going on in an organization, really, for our red team engagements, we really drill down, like Sandy said, people, process, and technology. Technology is a big part of that, but really we usually see the breakdown in people and processes. Everyone here, I imagine, knows what phishing is. Maybe you've clicked on a phishing email, but almost certainly you've gone through phishing training at some point in your career, and that's usually because people are the weakest link. Whether that's on their ability to recognize, detect, or even click on a phishing email, or in their jobs in security defenders, their ability to coordinate a cohesive defense for the department or agency from an unknown adversary. We really see breakdowns in that process as well, as much as all the vendors are here today to a single pane of glass, a SIM to help get all your data in one place, right? While much of the time that happens, if bad data is going in, bad data is coming out, and your network defenders are making bad decisions based upon that. Well, with our red teams, we get to comment on, well, we know what you guys were seeing because we were logged into your SIM, same as you. We saw you see the alert, and then just go back to Googling Fortnite. True story has happened within the past 3 weeks that we've seen something like that happen, and then forget about the important things that were going on in the job. So really highlighting gaps in their ability to detect, their ability to rapidly iterate and create new detection rules, do the detection engineering process when they're within their own department or agency, and then coach them through the process of making that better. We'll sit down with them live at the end of our red team engagements and tell them all the hosts we were on, all the domains we used for callbacks, all the people that we fished in some cases. We'll burn it all to the ground for any cyber threat intelligence people in the room. We'll tell you everything we did, because at the end of the day, it's not about keeping our own secrets and keeping our own tradecraft secure. We want all these federal departments and agencies and private sector organizations to be better because we were there. And so that's a lot of work, and creating it from scratch every time and burning our tradecraft every single time. But it's for the good of defending America. So there's a little bit of altruism there for us as well.
And our team, not to brag, but kind of, we are the first that I've ever seen in this space publish our findings, and we anonymize the entity, of course. But talk a little bit about the process to go through that, and what the feedback is from the community, because I get that is the one product that I get thanked for over and over and over again. We do a lot of writing to make sure everyone kind of understands what we're doing, and we want to give that contribution back to folks. But yeah, I know that it's a tough process for you to go through to get that out. So
sure, yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So for the uninitiated, if you haven't read them, one of the things that CISA does, I've been red teaming for the better part of 20 years, professionally, Air Force before this, and private sector. And one of the things that CISA started doing over the past 2 or 3 years is publishing the results of our red team engagements. For any of you all that have read a pen test report or been on the receiving end of one of these, you knew that they can be very revealing. And that you probably don't want that published on the internet for literally everyone to read. Me, as one of the authors of these things, publishing them was one of the biggest, pucker factors, of my entire career, anonymizing one of these and putting it out on the internet. There's plenty of YouTubers and podcasters that we saw try to figure out who is the customer, because we want to know, because if we can figure out the customer and attribute it, here's a map to breaking through their network, right? And so through our legal counsel, through our external affairs, and through our customers, as long as they will agree to it, which they do most of the time, we'll work through a process of basically just sanitizing it, taking out stuff that is specific to their organization and only their organization, and make sure that the attack paths and findings and implants and lateral movement techniques and all that, one, are accurate, but also aren't identifying to our customers. They can be identifying to us all day, is what we hope, but as long as they're not identifying to our customers, really that's the way we found that we can give back the best. I talked earlier about our ability to scale. Unfortunately, I'll say it out loud, but the Red Team is one of the services that we really don't want to automate, the Red Team service, because it requires a nuanced approach for every customer. We only do about 6 of these a year. And instead of scaling by volume, we really scale with outreach by publishing these, what we call cybersecurity advisories, and really getting the lessons learned out there to all the different organizations so that they can learn before we come around, or before I email them and say, hey, how about a CISA Red Team coming to your organization next week? What do you say? Hopefully they've got some time to anticipate that. And we use pretty current tradecraft, pretty current techniques, things that bad guys are using within what our lawyers will allow us to do. But we also get to, push the bleeding edge on a lot of that as well. So Sean said earlier he has the coolest job in the world. I respectfully disagree. I've got the coolest job in the world. We can arm wrestle about it later, though.
I've got the coolest job in the world. This is my team. So I want to pivot real quickly to Martin, because one unique thing that we offer is operational technology assessments. So we have worked for decades with Idaho National Labs and Carnegie Mellon and a bunch of other partners to develop this framework for validated architecture design reviews. So Martin, will you walk us through kind of like what that process looks like, what we do, how we engage with these stakeholders and the kinds of stakeholders that we engage with to go and do these operational technology assessments?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, as you mentioned, so we do one of the services that we offer is a VEDA assessment, which is a validated architecture review, design review for OT and ICS systems. So, just like Paul mentioned, what we are looking for really is, the integration between people, process, and technologies across an industrial control system or an operational technology system. So, we are looking at holistic view of how do you actually manage an industrial control system. We're looking to see how your network is. So we do a couple of things. We look at the actual design of the network. We do a pickup, which is a packet collection of data to see how the data is moving around your network. We look at how your network is segmented between OT and IT to avoid any kind of parallel attack across your network. And then we look at the people and the processes. Do you have the right people in place? Do you have people that are actually in charge, that's responsible, budget, or technically people who can actually maintain your system using some of the best practices? On top of that, one of the things that I know you may be asking, how does all this work connect together? One of the things that this team talked about earlier, it's all this sort of assessment or kind of assessments. One of the things that CISA does very well, and just an agency, we are also an information sharing agency. One of the things that we do very well is actually take all this data assessment, whether it's CAF, whether it's data from pen test or red teams, and then we do analysis of that data to really understand the threat landscape. So from CISA, we have that information. We also use industry, and we also use experts to come up with some of the best practices for our assessment. One of that product of that kind of a collaboration is something called Cyber Performance Goals, or CPGs. It's a cross-sector performance goals. So in this instance of VEDA assessment, we are able to look at some of our best practices for within the cross-sector goals and ask an industry, hey, are you doing these things that can actually help you be more resilient? I'll give you a quick example. Is your network segmented between OT, IT? Are there jumpers that are actually sharing data, or do you want to completely segment? Are you sharing credentials? Are you making sure that you manage your elevator credentials away from other credentials? Do you use multi-factor authentication? Those are some of the interconnections that we do with all the data aggregation working with the industry. So in the example of the VEDA assessment, we look at that. We look at how the actual network is working. We look at pickup data, and we also look at some of the product that these other teammates do, like CAF, to see are there vulnerabilities that are coming from the kind of products that you are running in that specific industry. And to tie that up, we do this across the 16 critical infrastructures. We've been very, very focused on water, wastewater, power generation, municipalities, and cities. Those are some of our customers. And as Paul said, we do this for free. We just need you guys to be taxpayers, and as long as you're taxpayers, we do provide these services to you for free.
But to kind of bring it together for software security, one thing that with all the assessments we do is we get, we understand their terrain and then what technology they're running. And so if, say in wastewater or in some of these OT environments, if there's a connected piece of technology that shouldn't be connected, but it becomes we see it's highly vulnerable. are we seeing this in our scan data, our global IPv4 scan data? Where is this vulnerability? How prevalent is this vulnerability across this sector? Should we do an engagement with that manufacturer to make sure that they are putting the things in place to? We had this example. What was it? Fuel tanks, fuel gauges. We had this at fuel gauges in the last year or two, where it was just rampant open telnet ports or port 80 ports just at every fuel gauge. It was just all over, wide open. We find things like this, and then we engage with the manufacturer, and the manufacturer does not have the infrastructure in place to mitigate the vulnerability. Then the stakeholders, the consumer, the gas station or the fuel gauge facility has to be the one to do the update or replace the technology. So there's all these layers of problems, but that was one really good example where we said, okay, we really need to do a concerted effort here on like OT and ICS, because these are the things that are out there that are going to impact the American public, critical resources, cause societal panic. So we work on things like that, and this whole team here has a role in identifying those connective dots so that we can use our processes to give back to try to secure those situations. So, all right, CPGs, Red Team, CVE, SBOM. Good. Are we ready for questions? Okay. All right. Well, we're going to open it up for questions. We're happy to take them. I think we're at the end of our panel anyway.
Good afternoon, Sally Kenyon Grant, Dark Trace, doing machine learning warfare for you, Paul, and thank you for this exceptional vulnerability panel. Paul, as my hardware is doing autonomous response, no signatures, rules, baselines, humans, unsupervised, would you accept for that 120 attack surface? Would you accept hardware?
I don't know if I understand your question. Would I accept hardware?
On a live network for live traffic, on your network to test that for the attack surface.
What, you
response.
mean putting your software on my attack network?
The software is in the hardware.
So putting your hardware on my network?
For live traffic to do that 120 attack surface test for vulnerability.
I don't think I'd put it on my network, on my personal network, or on my offensive network that we use for red team assessments. Our customers are more than welcome to, or have it as part of their stack, if that's what you're asking. I'm not sure if I'm understanding exactly what you're asking.
We'll get into it after. Thank you so much.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Hi, Farhan Safedin. I was curious about the bridge between DoD IAVM and the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities, the KUV list that CISA puts out. There seems to be a lot of overlap there. Obviously, the DoD has the IAVA bulletins that come out pretty much weekly or daily in some cases. Is there any sort of bridging between CISA and DISA on KUV and IAVM, and how can the industry support that?
I think that's actually a really good suggestion. I don't know why there is not a connection between IAVM and CVE and KEV. But I think that one reason is the prioritization is like the methodology for prioritization might be DoD specific. They want to use this program and prioritize however they would like. I think there would be really positive synergies for CISA and DISA and JFHQ DODIN to work together to come up with a integrated prioritization and one standard for identifying and tagging and prioritizing vulnerabilities. I think at least one core standard, and I think we all have different intelligence and architectures, so some things might be more important to one agency versus another. So I think there's definitely a potential for future synergy, but yeah, this.
Excellent. And how do you think vendors and the industry can support that?
Well, I think we've got to partner with you on, trying to come up with this joint standard and work together on implementing it. I mean, we've got to do that kind of government to government engagement first, I think, and then once those decisions are made, I think, it'd probably make it a lot easier for industry to support.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
The only thing that I would add is from a vendor or anybody out there, if you have a tip or any evidence of exploitation, email us at kev@mail.cisa.dhs.gov. We take tips all the time, and we will evaluate it against our standard for exploitation in the wild. And if it has a CVE and there's a patch or mitigation available, poses a threat to the federal civilian executive branch, CI, or state, local, tribal, territorial governments, we can add it to the KEV.
Anybody else? Oh, got one more.
Yeah, Pat Novak from SMS. Sandy, this isn't a trick question, but would you say that your resources at CISA are limited or becoming more limited?
So I would say, they're obviously whatever's reported publicly is public. We in the cyber division are heavily aligned to authorities and are, pretty good standing right now. So I'm not really concerned about the impact to my specific vulnerability management mission.
And second question, what is the future for CDM for you guys?
CDM is in a separate subdivision, but I'll just say that it's a capability, just looking at my DoD time, that I wish we had in DoD, and I see a bright future for enhancements for CDM. It's bringing together a lot of data that we wouldn't have across the entire FSEB, and analytic capability as well. So we're always working to enhance that because we want to be able to see across the entire federal executive branch.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the panel. Could you comment about post-quantum cryptography?
No.
Please?
Someone smarter than me. Take that.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
But timing, threat, data, things like that. I'd love to hear any opinions you have.
Just say, we are hyper-focused on, being prepared for potential threats in the future from our near-peer adversaries and doing everything we can to combat that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dave, we all see you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Dave.
Dave Carroll back there. Oh, he's going to ask us a question.
No hard.
I was going to volunteer to do the post-quantum, but...
Okay, go ahead. Do it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.